Good morning, everyone. Good. Well, my name is Jerome Russell, and I'm honored to be able to be up here on stage with Andy Young. We're going to have a straight talk, and then after we finish, there's going to be a book signing outside where Andy will sign his new book called Making of Modern Atlanta. So, just to give you a little background, I'm a native Atlantan. I'm part of a family business here called H.J. Russell and Company, and we're involved in real estate, airport concessions, banking, and we're also doing an innovation and entrepreneur center. My father passed about a little over 2 years ago, but he and Andy had a very, very, very close relationship. And what I'm going to do here today is I'm going to open it up with a picture. So if you could put the picture up on the screen there, and we're going to build off of that picture. So it should be coming up soon.
There it is.
Okay, everybody see that picture there? So that was a picture in a house that I grew up in Collier Heights of Atlanta. I assume the time of that picture was probably around 1965, somewhere in there. The man that's sitting in the chair is my father, Herman Russell. The man to his left is Martin Luther King. Next to Martin Luther King is Ralph David Abernathy. And the young man sitting on the edge of the sofa is Andy Young. Andy, what were y'all talking about?
No, I was invited. Actually, they had a wonderful house, and it dropped off in the back, and they had put an indoor swimming pool. And they had invited us over for a swim. And so I came ready to swim. But we had to talk a little bit first. And of course, I'm a preacher too, but I don't like to dress like a preacher. And they were talking business. I was ready to swim. Mrs. Russell fixed a wonderful lunch for us after we went swimming. The thing I remember about that was that Ralph, our children came too. They were already at the swimming pool. And Ralph saw all of our children jumping in swimming. And he just figured you jump in and everything was all right. And he jumped in the deep part. And he couldn't swim. And I had been a lifeguard in college, but Ralph weighed about 270 pounds. And I wasn't about to let him grab me and drag me to the bottom of that pool. So I dived in and went up under him and held him up and walked him to the side until he got out. And then he said, well, you saved my life. Now you got to take care of me. But we had a good time. And every now and then, the Russells would invite us over just to talk. And the family was one of the most extraordinary families I've known. Otelia Russell was from rural Georgia. Mm-hmm. And I think you said at her going home service that she was a superwoman. Mm-hmm. And that I'll never forget, you said that there were two men trying to put a washing machine mm-hmm. or something in a place in the kitchen. Yeah. And they were trying to, little guys, she went in and grabbed the washing machine, she picked it up and put it back in. I mean, she was a good, strong woman in every sense of that word. Strong in the values, strong in her commitment to her family and her husband, and really, I think, was a rock that the whole city depended on, and she never got or wanted a bit of attention. And the key to any great family is usually great mothers and grandmothers, and their family was no exception. But they were important in the making of modern Atlanta. And because his daddy started off at about 10 or 11 years old in business. And he started with a shoe shine stand. And he made the mistake of going to the city hall to try to get a permit. And he was a young boy that had a speech impediment, but he was a young black boy who came to the city to get a license for business. And the city council laughed at him. And he left humiliated, but he committed that nobody would ever laugh at him again about business. And he said, nobody on that city council comes down my street anyway. I'm gonna go ahead and build my shoe shine stand. And he built his shoe shine stand, and between, say, 12 and 16, he made enough money to buy a lot across the street, $150. And his father, Jerome's grandfather, was also in plastering and was always on building sites. And Herman sort of got enough off the building sites that was not being used and built a house by the time he was 16. And he rented that house out, and that's the way he paid his way to Tuskegee to get a degree in general contracting. And so at the same time, the man who designed this hotel, John Portman, was struggling. He was poor and white. Herman was poor and black. But they kind of worked together from the very beginning. And so I think of them and the team that gathered around them as being the symbols of Atlanta's success. But we had a political crisis in about 46, 47. Mayor Hartsfield, for whom the airport is named, bought the land for that airport for $90,000. He invited Delta to come from Louisiana to Atlanta, and he gave them all the land they needed for $1 a year for 50 years. He also put up red lights on Peachtree, and they voted him out of office. And Mr. Woodruff of Coca-Cola and other business people said, look, let's face it, we don't have enough progressive white people in this town to move this town fast enough if we're going to really be a leader in the South. At that time, Atlanta was a little crossroads for railroads. We were behind Birmingham, Charlotte, Miami, Jacksonville, New Orleans. We were just here. But that decision to create a partnership between the white business community and the black community that was in Atlanta University. There were probably more black PhDs in Atlanta University than anywhere else in the world in the 40s. And so that created a coalition of goodwill, or as Martin Luther King called it, a coalition of conscience, that has worked together almost all consistently on everything we've done, and we would not have been able to do it without doing it black and white together, and without doing it rich and poor together. And we couldn't have passed the mass transit bill in 1971 if we didn't have poor people organized. And so the Coca-Cola Company and IBM helped to organize the poor through Economic Opportunity Atlanta. And the head of the Woodruff Foundation was the chair of it. And he put together a board that had Martin Luther King Sr., Daddy King, Calvin Craig of the Ku Klux Klan, and Zenona Clayton, who had been working with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And they really decided that they were going to have to make this city work. And that's the key to making a modern Atlanta, that everybody got together. Mayor Sam Massell was the next mayor after, well, Hartsfield, Ivan Allen, then Sam Massell. Sam Massell was negotiating the deal in '71, and poor people said, well, you're going to make us pay a 1-cent sales tax, but it's not going to help us. So Sam Massell agreed to lower the bus fare from 55 cents to 15 cents for 10 years to make it fair to the poor. Manuel Malouf, who was a Lebanese bartender and chief executive officer of DeKalb County, said, look, we want the mass transit line, but my folk out here in East Atlanta just think that the white folks want to build a mass transit system from Buckhead to the airport, and they'll never build our east-west line. So we decided to build the east-west line first. And so it was a city where people talked to each other, compromised, did whatever it took to make the city work. And we've been able to do that, you know, right on up to almost till today. It wasn't always easy, and there were lots of difficulties, but that group, that business group, in fact, it was Ivan Allen who said, look, we don't want the children. We think the South, Birmingham, New Orleans, Little Rock, made a mistake by making the children integrate schools as a means of integration. We're going to integrate the business community first. And his father and Jesse Hill were the first two black business people who were put on the board of the Chamber of Commerce. So they kind of knew what they needed to do to make the city work, and they did it right. Now, that's still a city that's trying to help everybody come up together. And that's the reason why I think we've been able to succeed.
Can you talk about the action forum during that time, Andy?
Yeah. The business community realized that they were all very busy people. But they said, this is important enough for us to have a Saturday morning meeting once a month. So once a month from 9 to 12, the business community met at the Chamber of Commerce with no press, in their shirt sleeves, and they talked about whatever was needed in the city. In fact, I remember in 1966 when the other cities started rioting, that was Watts riots and then Detroit, and they said, we don't want Atlanta to riot. What can we do? Well, there were 12 black businessmen and 12 white businessmen. And his father was, of course, the richest of the black businessmen. He doesn't like to admit that, but he was the most generous, he was the hardest working, he should have been the richest. And when they got together, he said, look, the answer is jobs. And 24 businessmen got on the phone and they created 6,000 summer jobs in about 10 days. When your banker calls you up and says, how many interns can you take for the summer? And so, well, maybe 3 or 4, make it 6. You can't tell your banker no. And they created 6,000 jobs of young people who would normally have been hanging out, but they had to put on a shirt and tie and go to work. Many of those young people became the vice presidents and sales regional people. And one of them, actually, I think probably did as much as anybody else to save Coca-Cola. That's Carl Ware. In the whole apartheid thing. And so it was bringing young people in who would have been on the streets in as interns, working on the delivery trucks, but they had a job for the summer, and they became identified with those companies.
Yeah, one of the things that I remember is that Mr. Hill and my father spoke. I think my father told me they spoke for every day for like 30 years. And at that time, of course, there were no cell phones. So what he would do, he would call the house early in the morning. You know, that was like the wake-up call.
6 o'clock, 5:30, 6 o'clock.
5:30, 6 o'clock. And they would strategize, and then they would talk during the day, and then they would talk at night. And then on the action forum, they would, you know, a group of them would get together and they would understand what role who would play. Like Mr. Cox would play a certain role in different things. So they were very, very strategic in how they moved, but also very much respected among their peers in the area.
There was a very, poor guy who grew up in the neighborhood, Buttermilk Bottom, but who stayed in connection with all of this group by the name of Fred C. Bennett. And he used to call me at 6:30 and say, "Wake up, boy." I said, "Look, I don't have," he said, "Look, don't you forget, in this town, all the decisions are made by 8 o'clock. If you in the bed, you don't know what's going on. Get your behind up and come down to Pascal's." And so usually after Jesse and Herman talked, and Q.B. Williamson in real estate, and there was a Callaway. They'd all come to Pascal's for breakfast. And if you wanted to know what was going on, you just had to drop by there before 8 o'clock. Now, Pascal's is taken over by his family's business, and it doesn't have that. I mean, everybody's now working so differently, but if you want to know what's going on, there's still a place to drop by, and you never know who you will meet there.
That's true. Andy, talk about the airport and how it has evolved from.
Well, that's the key to Atlanta's greatness, I think. First, it started with Hartsfield, who built jet-length runways when there were no jets. But he was forward-thinking. Ivan Allen built another simple airport, and evidently it had a little debt to it. Maynard decided to build a much bigger airport. And it happened because there were a couple of guys from Wall Street. One of them was Bill Hayden, and another was from Goldman Sachs, was Garland Wood. And they told us that we could build the airport without any money. And they explained it. They said, "Look, you can come to Wall Street and buy tax-exempt municipal bonds. Now, all you have to do is get everybody that's going to do in business in the airport to sign." So Delta, Eastern, United, American, right on down the line. Then Marriott was a concessionaire, and Dobbs Pascal was a concessionaire, and Avis, Hertz, the parking lot. Everybody was on the note. At the bottom, the city of Atlanta. Everybody had to go bankrupt before the city of Atlanta had to pay. And we wouldn't let them make any money until they paid the debt service first. So by structuring a deal that everybody was in it, Maynard went not to Washington, but to New York, and borrowed the first $450 million. And I never thought of that kind of money. But when I became mayor, the airport opened in December 1981. I had been elected mayor November 81, but I didn't take over till 82. And so when I came in, the airport was up and running, but it didn't have an international terminal, and it only had the 2 runways. So they sent me back up to New York, and to get $300 million more.
The airport is the most, I mean, I can look at what it meant to the history of our business. So when Maynard was mayor, that was our first opportunity to do business in the airport. And at that time, my father we had a construction company, and we built, I think it was just Concourse A and Concourse B. And there was a tunnel. So when you ride in those, when you go in and you take the tunnels, he was the contractor for the tunnel. And that was in the 70s. I mean, so you fast forward all the way 40 years, forward, it is the most biggest economic, particularly for African-American businesses, the most significant economic empowerment vehicle that the city has around creating business enterprises.
Well, Maynard wouldn't build it unless everybody agreed that 25% of every contract. Now, Sam Massell started with 20% of all of the money in MARTA going to minority and female-owned companies. Well, no, we didn't have female-owned. It was Maynard that started female-owned companies as minority companies, because there were no businesses owned by women, black or white. And I remember there was a lady who was a graduate of Georgia Tech. Her husband left her. She was on welfare with 4 children in Techwood Homes. And she had a degree from Georgia Tech, and she was a paving contractor, but nobody would give her any work but paving driveways. We had just about were ready to open the airport, and we had all this miles of parking lot to pave. And she came in and said she could do it. And she did it. And immediately that transferred her from a welfare mom to a millionaire. And that happened to a lot of businesses. Because that $458 million to start with, take 25% of that. And it was 25% of every contract. So, and then when I came in, they sent me up there to get $300 million more to build the 3rd runway and the 4th runway. And now we're building on the 6th and 7th runway. But I had a fight with Delta and the airport because I wanted to build the T concourse as an international concourse. That's the first one now. And they didn't want it. And they paid one of these, I don't know what they call them, the McKinsey and, consultants. Mm-hmm. They paid them to do a feasibility study. And they came back saying we didn't need it and we couldn't afford it. Well, I didn't believe in the feasibility study, so while they were studying, I was lining up Lufthansa and Japan Air, Swiss Air, KLM, and we already had British Caledonia, so we had 6 international airports, airlines ready for the international terminal when they were telling us it wasn't needed and we couldn't afford it. So we had to build it in 24 hours. But that gave me the authority to just quietly raise the ante from 25% to 35%. And that's the way Atlanta's sort of been built. We've worked everything out. We've maintained not only business relationships, but friendly relationships. And it's been as much, I think, our wives. We got the wives of the business community involved in Spelman College and Clark Atlanta University and Morehouse College and the like. And they got us involved in the High Museum. Right. And so business integrated the city.
Okay, well, what makes Atlanta, are there any other international cities, U.S. cities that you feel are like Atlanta, or is it that unique in its nature that makes it special? When you kind of do some comparisons.
Well, That's the problem. I think maybe Nashville maybe has caught on, and they're doing fairly well. Whether they're doing it as integrated as we are, I don't know. But the thing that worries me most is, and the reason I wrote the book, Making About in Atlanta, was that it wasn't happening anywhere else. And it was so easy for us. But again, Atlanta is a very unique place. And there was something, the reason we have to go black and white together is, one, Ivan Allen. Ivan Allen's ran for governor as a racist. And yet when his daddy turned over the Chamber of Commerce to him, he said, Ivan, he said, we've done everything right in this city but race. And you and your generation are going to have to take on the race problem. Well, to get that message from your father as you're taking over the presidency of the chamber and then becoming mayor, he ended up being the only mayor in America to testify for Congress in the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And he was serious about the importance of desegregation. When Martin Luther King won the Nobel Prize, there were a lot of people who didn't want to honor him. President of Coca-Cola had just come back from South Africa, and he said, look, we cannot be in a city that refuses to honor a Nobel Prize winner. Coca-Cola doesn't need Atlanta. We can move our headquarters anywhere. If Atlanta needs Coca-Cola, it cannot dishonor a Nobel Prize winner. Well, of course, it sold out next hour. But to have that kind of commitment from the mayor, president of the chamber, and also that kind of commitment from the largest, and by being a global company, Coca-Cola was more sensitive to what was going on in the world than most companies. So they have been a leader up to the present in almost everything that has gone on, because they see things in a global perspective.
Yeah. I remember my mother telling me, wow, you mentioned the Nobel Peace Prize, they had a dinner, and she told me that there was a lot of fear that there was going to be a bombing or something at that dinner.
Well, the synagogue had been bombed.
Right.
Because Rabbi Rothschild was one of the first who agreed to co-sponsor the dinner.
Right. Okay. So where do you see the future? I mean, Atlanta, has had 40 years of an African-American mayor. Where do you see the future?
Well, let me just say
yes,
that it might have been 40 years as an African-American mayor, but it was also, and I'm not bragging, but the people running who were African-American were smarter, worked harder than the white people who were running. White people who were as smart as us were billionaires. They wouldn't take any $50,000 job, you know? And so it's only been now that we've gotten the city raised up, and I don't know what the mayor's salary is now, but it's a little more respectable. You also have billionaires who made their money and who are now coming back wanting to run. And I still think that right now, what I say to everybody who wants to run, why? I don't know why anybody would want this job. For somebody to wake you up in the middle of the night and say, the expressway fell through. Or the next time, you know, the students are down there attacking the police, saying Black Lives Matter. You know, what am I going to do? Fortunately, the worst I had was a snowstorm and the bombing at the Olympics. But that's the other thing. The Olympics, almost everything we have done with private money. We have not used government money for any of our big successes. The city of Atlanta doesn't put any money into the airport. All that's Wall Street money, see? And we have a AA rating because it's making money for everybody who's buying those bonds. Now, what I'm trying to say now is, I don't know why other cities don't do that. And as part of my foundation, I've been working with the 75 cities along the Mississippi River, trying to tell them, why don't we create an enterprise zone a half mile on each side of the river and create public-private partnerships to develop the whole Midwestern United States. Now, let me give you a good example of how this made sense to us. We had a regulation, well, just an agreement that within a half-mile radius of each mass transit station, we could create a public-private development corporation, and that would be an enterprise zone. We had a little town out there right at the end of just beyond Lenox Square called Johnsontown. It was assessed, we could only pay people the assessed value from the money that we were getting from the government. So most of those houses were worth $5,000 to $15,000. That's all we could pay them legally of state funds. But that was not enough to move them. If we had moved them out with just that amount of money, it would have blocked the whole mass transit system, because they could have raised so much hell in this city that they could have stopped MARTA in its tracks. Instead, we had people who were able to sit down with the developers and say, look, because you're in this enterprise zone, normally the interest rates would be 8.9%. We can get you 5.9% interest. And you're going to use this to build a 30-story building. Why can't you pay these poor folks for the air rights? Since you're going to use the air rights. Nobody ever asked them to do that. But because we could give them a half the interest rate, and because we could give them 5 years tax-free on paying any money back, they were able to give, it was only about 10 or 12 houses and a church. They were able to add $100,000 to everybody's home price. And so people didn't get $5,000, they got $105,000, or they got $115,000. Everybody moved away happy. The developer was happy. That project was a success. And he made so much money, he built all the rest of, almost all of Lenox Road between Lenox Square and the Expressway is housing that he built as a result of the success of that building. So we were very creative in doing win-win situations. And if the city goes out of its way to make everybody a winner, then the city can call on them to do other things to keep the winning going in the city. And that goes on up to today, that Arthur Blank is doing, well, first place, Arthur Blank came here broke, he says, in 1980. He and Bernie Marcus had been fired from a Handy Andy hardware store in California. And they came here with this idea of the Home Depot. And they built it up, and they started it just as I was starting as mayor. In 25 years, they had made so much money when they sold it. I think each one of them has given almost $1 billion to the city. And Arthur Blank owns the football team, Bernie Marcus owns the aquarium, and this new stadium is about $1.5 billion.
$1.7 billion.
And the city isn't paying any money. Now, you may be paying some. But whoever's paying your room rent, we added $1 onto the room tax. So everybody that stays here will pay an extra $1 toward the dome. But I think our room tax is still about $14 a night. In New York or Washington, it's $21, $22. So we figure as long as we can stay well below the competition, nobody will complain. So we have used the hotel motel tax. And that's also kind of fair because people are coming here because we build in that stadium. We'll have the national championships here next year for the NCAA. We have the Super Bowl in 2019. I mean, we have that stadium booked up for the rest of, almost for the rest of the decade, with big events that will keep the hotels full. That's the other thing. These hotels started growing up, and we worked on building the convention industry. When we first started, the hotels were filled from Monday to Thursday. And so I became mayor, and so I said, look, this is a great place to promote family reunions. So we started sending out notices to churches, have a family reunion in Atlanta, come introduce your children to the colleges, and that sort of took up weekends. And then you see the people who were here when we got here, everybody knows this is a great place for a weekend convention. And we now have 50 million tourists a year. We're right even with New York in terms of the number of conventions and tourists that we have. And I figure if each tourist probably spends $1,000 a day by the time they finish all their dinner and their meetings. And I don't know, when these sororities come here, they clean out Neiman Marcus and Saks. And when the church ladies come, they buy all the hats in town. And so it has just made this a thriving metropolis because it's an inclusive metropolis. And we couldn't have made it if it was just basically if people thought of this as a white city, but neither could we make it if people thought of it as just a black city. It's because y'all come and everybody's welcome that I think, and we try to keep including everybody in the potential and the profits. And we listen to everybody's ideas. Now, it's going to be rough this year because I think there are about 18 people running for mayor. And half of them are black and half of them are white. But I don't know how it's going to turn out. And we've not had that kind of organized division. When I ran for mayor, the white community had decided that because Cleveland and Gary and Newark were having trouble growing, that cities could not grow with black mayors. And so that was the only reason I ran, was that Maynard and a lady by the name of Miss Susie Laborde shamed me into running. But I'd been to the UN and I knew that not only was there Wall Street money available, but there was money available all over the world that would come any place that it was safe, it was honest and efficient. So we brought in 1,100 businesses in the 8 years that I was mayor. We broke ground at this hotel and the region. No, the Hyatt was before me, but the Ritz-Carlton out in Buckhead. And we had almost a hotel every couple of months because we brought all the consulates here. Then when that led us to the Olympics, and in the Olympics we raised $2.5 billion privately. Minority and female-owned companies got 41% of all of the Olympic money. and we finish with almost $100 million left over. And everything we built, we gave to the institutions that we built, on whose property we built it. So we've run a city pretty well, and everybody's benefited from it. But this would be the greatest city in history with 3 million people. Problem is, we got 6.5 million people. And we had 30% poor when I became mayor. But I think we kind of educated that 30%. But 30% of a million, you know, we've dealt with. But now we got 6 million. And it's still 30% poor. So everything is multiplied, but nobody's given up. But it's a far more difficult challenge. And I really have focused my interests not so much on solving Atlanta's problems, but dispersing Atlanta's problems. I think it's better to raise your children in small towns in the South. I think the development along the East Coast in Savannah with a new port, we can become the import-export capital of the world. We're trying to, everybody goes to all of these great colleges down the Mississippi River, and there are no jobs where they go to college, so they come here. Well, one of the things our foundation is doing is trying to show the 75 cities along the Mississippi River how they can do some of the things we've done and at the same time have money to fix the river and stop it from flooding. That river floods, you know, is somewhere every year. And in the last 10 years, it did $101 billion worth of flood damage. The Corps of Engineers say they need $125 billion to fix the river. The Congress doesn't have that much money. So I've been trying to get the mayors to say, let's create a Mississippi River Development Authority and sell municipal bonds to all the money in the world.
Got it. Okay, all right. Kind of going back to as Atlanta has grown, Andy, how do we I feel that the metropolis or the inner city has become very expensive, and then there are other parts of the city that are not doing as well. So the economic prosperity has been disproportionate. What are your thoughts on that, and how do we address that?
Well, I tell you what, every city in the world that's successful has rich people downtown and poor people out in the country. America was different. And we had poor people downtown, and rich people tended to move to the suburbs. And middle class and rich black people tended to move to the suburbs. And there's nothing you can do about that. They tended to say the schools were better. But, you know, I had lived in New York before I came here for a little while. And I'd lived in New York and I'd lived in Thomasville, Georgia. And there was no question to me that living in Thomasville, Georgia was better than living in New York, if I could make a living. Atlanta was a nice compromise. So I bought a house for $32,000 in 1966, and that's where I live. And that's where I'm gonna live. I'm 15 minutes from the airport and 15 minutes from downtown. I'm 10 minutes from the Atlanta University Center. And the schools that are surround me, everybody says they're bad test scores, but so what? I went to a school with terrible test scores, but I got the best damn education. I can deal with niggas all over the world, and white folks too. No, I'm saying, that when people ask me, where did you study to be an ambassador? I say, Valina C. Jones School. I said, by third grade, I had to figure out how to keep from getting my butt kicked and my lunch money taken. See, and then I lived in a neighborhood in New Orleans with the Nazis on one corner, the Irish on another corner, the Italians on another corner. And I'm in the middle. I mean, I can't find a better upbringing than that. I worry that my children have had it too easy. You know, that they should have gotten their butts kicked a little bit. But, you know, actually by that time we learned nonviolence. And so I remember when Paula first came in and went to Cascade Elementary School, she came home and she said, Daddy, nobody likes me. They keep picking on me. I said, why do you say that? I don't know, they pull him. I said, baby, boys pull your hair because they like you. I said, now, girls don't like the fact that the boys like you. So what you have to do is speak to all the girls and be nice to all of the boys and make them talk to you and act like they got some sense. And dogs and boys, don't ever let them know you're nervous or scared. See? Don't run from them. See? And after a while, she came home. I said, well, how you getting along? She said, you know, I'm having a good time. And but having learned that before she got out of elementary school, she's been all over the world. And those lessons, I mean, she was in Uganda with Habitat, and there were two insurrections. And I said, but how'd you get along? She said, I don't know. I just spoke to all the soldiers, and I mean, it works. But if you protect your children when they're young, and you only let them get along with the same kind of people, when they get in the world and the people are different, they're going to have problems. And I think the diversity of this city is its strength. And a lot of people that come in here as immigrants move right on up the ladder. And they bring us a vitality that other cities don't have. And I can't think of any other way to make it work, but just to accept the fact that it's really not our city. And the song I like most, and then I'm gonna have to quit because this is my father's world. And you know, it belongs to all people. There's no such, there are old Atlantans that think that things are not the way it ought to be, they used to be. Well, thank God they're not the way they used to be. There's nobody in Atlanta that's not better off. They might not like it because it challenges them, but that's the way life is. It moves forward. We've tried to move forward and keep pace, and we've tried to stay a little ahead of the planet. It's not an accident that Martin Luther King won a Nobel Peace Prize from Morehouse. It's not an accident that Maynard Jackson, in fact, if Maynard Jackson's father had not died when he was still in high school, he wouldn't have had to work selling encyclopedias and Bibles from door to door. And it was selling, when you can sell black folk encyclopedias from door to door, you become a very good and a very aggressive politician. And that turned out to be the kind of training that gave him the confidence. If you can knock on every door in a neighborhood of poor people, you can sure knock on the door in Wall Street. And you can knock on the door in the nation's capital. You can knock on the door in any bank. And the thing that people really almost resented about Maynard was pompous, arrogant, and confident any damn where. And he was so big, he intimidated you. And he spoke, I mean, Maynard's grandfather had 5 daughters. 4 of them had PhDs and one of them was an opera singer. I mean, he was a black aristocrat. and he acted like it. See, but a polo colored, he was poor, but he was smart, and he used to have to wear a shirt and tie to dinner, and whereas the rest of us could say Jesus wept, he had to have a new poem, a new sonnet of Shakespeare, something before he could eat. Now, that was the old black aristocracy, and I'm glad I did not have to be part of that. But I just barely escaped it. And that's the thing about this city. We've had the best of everything. We've had some of the best and most charitable and religious. And even though Ted Turner used to brag about being a sinner and atheist, I told Ted that the Lord is going to be so glad to get him into heaven. See, because it doesn't matter what his drinking and cussing and all that had to do with it. He gave $1 billion to the United Nations. And the Lord's going to ask him, did he feed the hungry? Yeah, he not only fed the hungry, but he helped Jimmy Carter and Bill Gates cure smallpox all over the world and polio all over the world. And that's feeding the sick, feeding the hungry, and healing the sick. That's what's going to get you in. And I think we found a way to do that without being too pious and too pompous, and still having a good time being who we are and learning from each other. Even the things we don't like, we usually learn to appreciate something about them.
Well, Andy, and ladies and gentlemen out here, I think that he has really laid out what makes Atlanta special. Its diversity makes it special. The ambassador, thank you. It makes it special. Its ecosystem around who we are and what we do makes it unique. And I think we are on the verge of really going to some new levels here. I mean, with what this conference is about, what our family will be doing with our Russell Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, is that we're just beginning building off this great legacy that has been built here. And I just want to give Ambassador Young really a standing ovation. Yes,
before you do that, can I get one commercial?
Sure.
This is John Bryant's Operation Hope. I have a title of Global Spokesman. The salary is $0. I also have a foundation trying to do other things of which my salary is $0. I didn't make any money on the Olympics because Tom Bradley said if you're going to raise money non-profitly, somebody has to not make money to keep everybody else honest. And so he gave me that task. So everything we've done, we've had to ask people to help. Now we're having I turned 85 in March, but I didn't want a birthday party. But I wanted to have some way to get the community involved in what we're trying to do, because we're trying to do what we did here all over the United States and also still in Africa. We opened the university, and we've got aquaponics, all of the things that we talk about here, we're trying to do in other parts of the world as well. And we're having I don't know what they call it, but on the 3rd of June at Phillips Arena, there are a whole lot of stars that have been friends of mine who are going to show up, and we're going to have a big entertainment. I wanted to have it at Phillips Arena because when you have it here and have a dinner, only the rich people can come. And I wanted to have some place where people could come to Phillips Arena and we fill the balconies with people who might have to pay but 85 cents instead of $850 or whatever they're going to charge. But I appreciate your support for that because it will let our foundation carry on for another year or so. And thank you.
Let's give it. Take a second. Thank you. So, Ambassador Young is going to go outside. You have copies of your book, right?
I guess.
Yeah. That he will sign. Thank you all for partaking in this session. Thank you very much.